Hey guys, we are now live on the Facebook Ads Power Hour show. Today is Wednesday, 17th of April, 2019. It feels like quite a few weeks since I've done this and gone live and spoken to a guest, and we've had a lot of things going on. So if you've been following me, I've been doing a lot of traveling, speaking at events, just come back from Fiji and masterminding in Fiji, as well as running my own mastermind in Singapore, which was super, super cool as well. But it's great to have you guys joining us. And today, my special guest is Andrew Foxwell, who I'll introduce just shortly. And you'll get a chance to find out a bit more about him. He's a super, super switched on guy when it comes to Facebook ads. And I've actually seen a lot of his stuff over the years. I didn't really know who he was through his association with Jon Loomer. And we'll go through kind of some of that background, some of the questions as well. So whilst you guys are joining us and logging in, I can see a few people are joining us. I think we're 8, 10 now joining in. Give us an idea where you guys are from. I always love to see where people are actually logging in from. I know sometimes the time zones get a bit difficult. So certainly if you're on the eastern side of the world, this is kind of late night, early morning. So apologies. But for the western side of the world, it's more of a decent time. So West Coast US, East Coast US, it's probably still daytime. Here in the UK, it's 9 o'clock in the evening, but just drop your location down. Give me a shout of kind of where you're logging in from. So today's guest is Andrew Foxwell. Hey, Andrew, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So like I said, I've followed your material for quite a few years now, and you know, you kind of read blog articles, and you know, Jon Loomer's blog is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in Facebook ads. And I've noticed your name on there. I just never knew who you were. I just thought, you know, there's this random guest blogger. Then kind of more recently found out you're more than a random guest blogger. You're a huge part of kind of Jon Loomer's world. And actually, you've got just as big, I think, a world of your own and following, which is totally awesome as well. There's a hello from Belgium and from London. Hey, guys. So give us an introduction of who you are, Andrew, and give us, our listeners, an idea of kind of what your background is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Andrew Foxwell, and I've been doing Facebook ads for about 11 years now, 12 years actually. I basically have been doing this since they were invented, which is hilarious. So I put all my eggs in that basket. And I have been working in the agency world, specifically on direct response e-commerce is a big part of my focus for a long time. Used to work in an agency, and then about 5 years ago started my own agency with my wife, and we run Foxwell Digital. And you can check us out at foxwelldigital.com. And what we do is essentially paid Facebook and Instagram advertising advice. We do some agency management, and then we also do education. So we do education through Jon Loomer. And do it in partnership with him. And then we also have a podcast with my colleague, Austin Bronner, the e-commerce influence podcast, which just surpassed 20,000 monthly downloads. So we're really proud of that. And that's for business owners that are e-commerce business owners, and for people that are Facebook ad specialists. So yeah, it's been a very fun journey, but it's interesting. Some of the brands that I've worked with along the way, are like Blenders Eyewear and Pure Vita bracelets, and Fitbit and Eventbrite and Square and others. And so I was in the very early days of paid direct response. And it's been something I've been dedicated to now for a long time. And it's been a really fun industry. And obviously, working for yourself isn't half bad either. So yeah. So I'm glad to be here and glad to get into the weeds.
Absolutely. So what was your entry point into Facebook ads? How did you fall into this crazy world?
Yeah, so I fell into the world of Facebook advertising. I actually was a congressional press secretary in the U.S. Congress for a member of Congress from Minnesota. And there was a new rule in a committee that changed that allowed members of Congress to advertise online. And one of the places they could advertise using their official budget, which is a taxpayer-funded budget to run their office, was traditionally they could only send out glossy mail pieces. And one of the places they could now do it through this new change was on Facebook. And Facebook was a brand new thing. Nobody knew what it was, what it did. So I then helped kind of get that going for my member of Congress, and then realized that a lot of my friends needed help So I left and started an agency sort of in another government contractor in the United States in Washington, D.C. And I helped members of Congress on their Facebook pages very early on. And so that's where I got my start. And then from there, I went to a company that is now called 3Q Digital. And I got an opportunity to work with big brands, which was a ton of fun. So yeah, it was great. Worked with, I was in early days at GoPro and helping them on Facebook and like, I even helped Facebook at one point on stuff. So I mean, it was a lot of fun to do different things in those early days. I remember actually riding on a bus when I was like with Wi-Fi in San Francisco. The first time I launched a link post, and I was like on the shoddy Wi-Fi, like trying to launch a dark post and all this. So we have come a long way. So it's pretty awesome.
I don't know if you can see the comments at the bottom of the screen. Adrian's saying you should have run the ads for Obama.
Yeah, no, actually, you know, in that time, I mean, that President Obama was the first. His team was really they were the first in the political side that really knew what they were doing with the political side. And again, mine was political, but also was more official. So mine was like taxpayer funded communication. Like, this is what we're doing for you. And it was really cool what you could do, because at the time I felt like it did do a lot for connecting that dialogue between government and the people. But at this point now, there's a lot of nuance to that. But now I really enjoy helping companies and help them grow and help them go from nothing into something, and help them really turn Facebook ads into a big part of their business.
Absolutely. So on that topic, what's been your biggest success, but the one you're most proud of as well?
I think with Facebook, the biggest success I can point to is Blenders Eyewear. Blenders Eyewear, I met the guys that were the co-founders of that company at I don't even know, 6 years ago now, probably something like that. And I ran their ads and helped them when they were spending $1,000 a month. And we, over the years, scaled together. We scaled how we did process. We scaled creative. We scaled things and brought them to the point where they were spending a significant amount of money. That's all I'll say. And then I sort of transferred them onto a partner agency of mine that has a bigger team, because they needed more people on it, and I purposefully wanted to remain small. So Blenders is now, a darling kind of, and I think Pura Vida falls in that example. I'm very proud of the work that we did early on in Pura Vida. That's another one. And the latest one that's big is 3 years ago, I met Brian Anthony's is a jewelry company, and they have been growing. And I just recently handed them off to another agency partner of ours. And they were mentioned in January on the Facebook earnings call from Sheryl Sandberg. I know these people, like Gracie and I, my wife and business partner, we know them. We've invested time with them. We love them. And they're just cool business owners that had a wonderful company that have really wonderful products that are made in the United States. And they've grown that from nothing into a really, really awesome business that now employs, over 25 people. So, and then if you look at the factory, there's another 50 to 100 people. So you just think about the actual economic impact of it, and it's really, really powerful what it can do.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And one thing you touched on, which we actually spoke about before we went live, you said you've intentionally not grown your company and you kind of refer off. It's something that we've actually taken to heart as well, and we've remained intentionally small. And I did a mastermind in Fiji, which we just touched on before the call as well. And I shared with people that although we're great at Facebook ads and we've helped lots of clients and we get a lot of inbound leads, as I'm sure you do because you do the public stuff as well, we have decided to keep the agency small because I don't want the headache of a large agency. It was never my goal to grow a large agency. It was to create a boutique offering and work with a small number of high power and fast growth clients. What was your kind of decision process behind that? Why did you decide to keep it contained? And how does that kind of pan out?
I think initially what it was is Gracie and I looked at it and basically said, we've made very conscious choices along the way to turn in a direction opposite of where a lot of people were going. So at the time, when we made this decision, we had seen that a lot of the model had basically been you build this agency, you hire people, and then you take these accounts, you bring them on board as the founder, and then you pass them off to somebody that works with you. And many times that was a more junior person or something like that. Now, not every agency does that, obviously, but that was something that we saw. And we saw that clients were coming back to us, or leads that had, gone to an agency, or people we'd been in discussion with, and they'd gone to a bigger agency, and they'd come back and said, we just want the personal connection. And so that was what we wanted to do, is we basically made the bet, which we had a ton of people reach out to us and be like, I feel like you are pigeonholing yourself. It's too small, and it's too niche in what you're doing. And it probably was at the point that we did this. I mean, this is, really, we made this conscious choice really in earnest about 2 years ago, even though we've been in business now about 6 years. And so at that point, it probably was not the best idea, but now it's really panned out, because we have been able, right now, everybody's running around like crazy, right? Facebook ads changes all the time. The rapid pace of what's happening and the differences that are going on is something that's, I think, a real challenge. And so we have purposefully remained small, and have purposefully remained with the point of having more headspace to be able to identify real issues, identify what's going on, what's actually working. And just recently in the last year, I would say we have made a more concerted effort to work and make sure that we're spreading across our colleagues too, to find out what they're doing and how they're doing. And by remaining small on the agency side, that's allowed us to have more conversations and relationships with people like you around the world, where we're able, people ask us, what are you seeing on this? What are you seeing on that? And we're able to have an informed answer for really anybody in the world at any time as it relates to direct response, right? So in any company size, so that's a big part of it that I think at the time wasn't something we thought was baked in, but that's why that's been a huge benefit. So we initially did it because we thought, nobody's doing this. Let's be specialists. Let's be really small. And now, that's really what we're trying to maintain, which is, how can we connect the dots for people and be a reliable source of information for people? Because, in this space, there's so much information. And I think a lot of people, you can get confused if you're not in it every day. And Absolutely. So, if you basically can turn to someone, or you can turn to our podcast, or you can turn to resources like you, and you can get a real answer, that's incredibly valuable. That's translated in a way that you're like, oh, okay, that actually makes sense.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And that's really super interesting. Colby is super impatient and says, talk about Facebook strategies and tactics, please. We will get onto that. But I'm actually, so this is something about the Power Hour. I invite people on that I genuinely want to hear from and want to learn from as well. And I love listening to how people have kind of fallen into where they are and how they're adapting. One of the other things I'm curious about is the connection with Jon Loomer. So back in 2012, when I started with Facebook ads, the Jon Loomer blog was the first place I fell into to start to understand Facebook better. And the guy's been doing this consistently for so long, probably the longest, I think, of anyone that's been doing Facebook ads. But how did your connection with Jon happen, and how did that develop?
In 2012, 13, somewhere in there, I was working at the agency, and my previous employer, and I read his blog, found his blog, and it was incredibly valuable. And so I started to blow up the comments basically, and was like, hey, how's it going? And then I emailed him and found his email, and eventually from there we formed a friendship, and we've been friends since then. And then it's grown. I mean, we have been on a guest on his podcast for a long time. And we have written, obviously, as you said, guest posts there. And last year he had said, hey, I want to partner on some education. And so that's continuing to this year as well. So yeah, that's basically how it started. And I live in Wisconsin in the United States, and he's from Wisconsin, even though he lives in Colorado now. And we're both Wisconsin sports fans. So we had a kind of a connection there as well. But he's a genuinely incredibly nice guy. I mean, the thing that I think is important, as you said about Jon, is that he will read through the fine print that many of us will not. Absolutely. And that's what he's done for years, right? So I can be out here testing these ideas and throwing stuff out and throwing out, a whole bunch of different things. But when it comes to the intentionality of what Facebook means with something or what they're trying to get to with something, there's nobody better than Jon to interpret that message and interpret what they're trying to get people to do with this or why it matters and how you can do it. I mean, last week, Jon deleted all of his custom audiences and he did a whole thing in his group about it. And he was talking about clearing house and why he wanted to start over. And, these are the types of things that just like, I wouldn't do that necessarily, Absolutely. Right? Like I would delete one or two, but not like the whole thing. So there's a different approach that he's always had. And I think, he's dedicated every day to writing and being helpful to people. And he's very good at those very technical explanations. So he's brought a lot of people into the fold because again, you read stuff from Facebook, sometimes you're like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. And so making sure that he's, diving into it's really helpful. And I think our friendship's been forged in that because we bring similar but different traits to the table.
Absolutely. Shout to Rob Ty, who says, I'm in Wisconsin as well. So,
oh, nice.
Fellow Wisconsinian. I don't know what you guys would call yourselves.
Wisconsinite. Yeah, Wisconsinite.
Absolutely. Cool. So, like, I'm interested in knowing your views on Facebook ads in 2019. Like, I have my view on where Facebook is going. I think they're trying to level the playing field for majority of advertisers. So, CBO is certainly a topic we'll touch on. And there's other things that I hear from Facebook that they're trying to introduce. Now, one of the things I tell people is the last time I read the stat, there was like 7 million advertisers on Facebook. If you look at the biggest Facebook ads group, there's only 100,000 there. That's a drop in the ocean of the total number of Facebook advertisers. So where is everyone else? Is it fake accounts? Is it real accounts? Is it multiple accounts? Whatever your argument is, there are still millions of ad accounts out there or advertisers. And the challenge that I get from Facebook is they're trying to build systems that solve a problem for the majority. So I would argue me, you, and everyone on this call, everyone in the Facebook groups, we are the minority when it comes to Facebook advertisers by volume, because the majority of people are, they come into the platform, they're running a small business, they just want to start making money, and they can't figure things out. And a lot of Facebook's supports and services are based on that. So I don't know if you have a marketing rep or a Facebook rep or anything like that, or what levels you've been through, but there are different levels and different hierarchies and different quality of support. And we all know this. Anyone that's working with Facebook with any decent volume, you'll know there's a different level of quality the more you spend. And there aren't enough of these support people to go around. So Facebook have to try and look at the majority. And this is where I think the likes of you, Jon Loomer, myself, and many other kind of Facebook ads, people who are trying to teach others feel a massive gap in that Facebook are not doing this. They can't do this. And therefore, people like you and I exist to fill those gaps and help people to understand Facebook better, implement it better, spend actually less money on wasting on Facebook ads, and actually make more profit as well. So I think there's a whole leveling going on with Facebook where they're trying to make the platform easier for the majority. Like, for example, I had an argument, and I think I might have mentioned it to you or Jon Loomer, I can't remember, but we were talking about lobbying against pushing CBO out, and rather than just give a flat line and say we're going to switch everything to CBO, leave the option open. Like, what's the harm in doing so? But there's a reason why Facebook are doing this, because they're trying to simplify the platform. So with all of that in mind, I'm curious to know kind of what your thoughts are on Facebook right now, where they are right now, where they're looking to go in the next 12 months, and kind of what you're seeing in the platform as well.
I mean, I think, first of all, just to comment on your thoughts on leveling the playing field, I think that's an incredibly good point. And I think that many times we forget that we are in the minority, as you said. So that's interesting. I mean, I've definitely thought about that, and I've never heard it put that way. So that's interesting. I think 2019 in Facebook ads to me is, there used to be a feeling within Facebook advertising, and you could certainly do it in Facebook advertising, that it was more of you could make it a lifestyle business. I think if you were a Facebook advertiser, I'm just speaking about somebody that's launching ads, and you would throw something up on a 1% lookalike, and you could let it cook, and it would be fine, and it'd be running for 72 hours or whatever, and it could run for a week, and the results would be ROAS positive. To me, the difference now, just from a tactical standpoint, is it's not that anymore. It requires an extra level of vigilance than I've ever had. We still manage about $500,000 in Facebook a month and in Facebook ads. And you have to be on it. You have to make sure that you're on it. You have to make sure that you're on testing. You have to make sure that you're testing Instagram stories, et cetera, right? And we can talk about those tactics, but I'm not saying that to scare anybody. I just think that it's not what it once was. And I think that a lot of the materials, unfortunately, that's out there that brings some people in was how do you grow a Facebook ads business, and it's no problem. You just get it going, and then you can charge clients X number of dollars, and it's going to keep on rolling. That's a model that's not going to be around anymore, and I think we're seeing that in some cases. I think that there's a kind of a weeding out happening in that sense. So that's the first thing that comes to mind in 2019, which is you have to have an extra level of vigilance. I think if you think about from a standpoint of bringing people into the fold and a leveling of the playing field, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there needs to be, and there is a conversation that's more that's trying to bring things through CBO, trying to make them easier. There's a lot more screen tips, right? They eliminated Power Editor and made technically the Ads Manager now is like a Power Editor Ads Manager mix. So they're going towards that, and I think that's generally a good thing, the simplicity of it. And that's, Facebook certainly wants to push that. I think the challenge sometimes arises from that, though, is those of us that are professional buyers. I mean, that's what we do. We launch ads. There's ups and downs that we're going to face. And there's things because they're trying to make it more simple and that we get caught in the middle of. So like, the UX changing yesterday, like you're like, okay, like I didn't even nobody told anybody that it was happening. Right. And then all of a sudden you have a new one. So there's stuff like that I feel like Facebook can improve on too, but that's big. I think from a tactical standpoint in 2019, I think you absolutely need to be testing and separating and thinking about, to me, Instagram very differently than you're thinking about Facebook. I think you need to be thinking about Instagram stories specifically a lot different. And I think that you need to make sure that you're also considering bigger audiences and considering what technically, I mean, just to get into the weeds a little bit, like what a 1% lookalike is actually going to do for you as you try to grow your account. And because a lot of the advice is built around start with 1% lookalikes or start with interests. And many times a 1% lookalike is just going to die faster. And a lot of people don't know that. Nobody says that, right? Unless you take a course through you or me, you don't really talk about that type of nuance. So I think from a tactical standpoint, that's another part of it. And I guess the fourth thing I just wrote down is creative. I mean, your creative has to be, your creative has to be something that stands out. It has to be, as you've said, I know before, thumb stopping. It has to be something that is going to catch you or going to do it. I mean, I have an example of this practically. I have a client right now that has a Mother's Day bracelet set. Okay. And it's a jewelry company. And I launched it to their best audiences in early April for 3 or 4 days. And it was not even breaking even. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And it's everything was coming along. And then I launched it with this new creative. And I went, and then I tried 3 different creatives again, and I social proofed all of those, and one of them hit, and that creative has allowed us to scale. And last week we made $100,000 in one day. Wow. And this is a client that was spending literally $1,500 a day before. And I don't say that to be like, Andrew, you're awesome. I say that to be like,
which you are.
Well, I mean. Really not really. It's not, it was basically the creative is what did it for me. The setup is all what we know. I mean, it's the things that we've talked about. Or the things that, you've talked about. It's setting up the different lookalikes and qualified lookalikes, et cetera, and doing interests and, mix of CBOs and some non-CBOs, et cetera, et cetera. But the creative is what made the difference. And I think that sometimes I get slapped in the face and I get too in the weeds and being like, this audience is this and this, and it's not enough around what are you actually showing to people? So that's the final thing I guess I would say in 2019.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes to the thing that I try and get people to focus on is with the tech that Facebook have, the machine learning and the tools, and trying to level the playing field for everyone, where you're going to win is on your marketing. So your marketing, and I talk about my concept is brand-driven performance marketing. So naturally, we are performance marketers. We're in the numbers. We understand the algorithm, and you put an ad up and you get some traffic, you do some landing page work, etc. It's very performance marketing led. But I like to get people to think as a brand marketer, because brand marketers do a great job of understanding the customer avatar, the points or opportunities, and linking that and bridging that to a solution. And that's the thing that I believe that people miss out when it comes to Facebook ads is, like, the person you're advertising to is a person. So humans can be predictable. Like, I get people to focus on the emotional benefits of your product or your service, and then tie up the functional. Whereas most performance marketers go straight to the functional. So like, yes, here's a jewelry set, it looks great, Mother's Day, etc. Or you take a more kind of emotional angle about, I don't know, I'm making this up, but this is the a unique set for a special mother, or I don't know, whatever the message is. Not talking about the product itself, but the experience. And you know, Facebook themselves. So I went to a creative session earlier this week in London, and they were talking about how some of the bigger brands do a great job of kind of creating brand stories. Now, they talk about kind of increasing reach, awareness, engagement, things like that. Things that performance marketers vomit over, because like, we want CPA and ROAS and all those kind of things. But it's merging those two together. And it's learning how the bigger brands create mini stories and create their funnels and tie that into user journeys. So for example, if you've got a video at the top of the funnel, you're selling a $150 watch, for example, chances are that video is going to do a job of opting in the right people into your funnel and hopefully opting out the wrong people, but they may not buy on that first click. And I think that's it took, like, when I started in 2012, I came from paid search. So in my mind, I was thinking, show an ad on Facebook, get the click at any cost, and then they're going to buy. That's not the case, because people, you know, they're in the social environment. It's the same as TV. Direct response marketing in TV can work, but people need that kind of memorability. Like, I don't know what the stat is about how many times people need to see an ad until they take action, for example. And some people think, you know, frequency is a bit too high, I'm going to start reducing my spend. Give it some time to test and actually see what happens. But really, my angle on Facebook ads is focus heavily on the marketing. The secondary layer is all the tech, the lookalikes, the bidding, all the account stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I mean, I think the many times I will admit that one of my faults, it comes to, you know, thinking about the tech side of it first and not enough around the story. And that's really where it can make a lot of difference. I mean, just speaking tactically about you know, creative wise, I think I talk about this a lot in the courses we've done with Jon, and it's interesting. When you hear that, right, and Facebook talks about this, they show you big examples of big brands, and they talk about it from a brand marketing standpoint. And a lot of these e-commerce retailers and companies that we work with, or people that are in this group, you know, or agencies that are managing these people. I mean, these are budgets of, you know, 10,000, 15,000 US or euro a month. I mean, they're not major accounts, right? So you're not going to, a creative budget is like not really something that's in your wheelhouse.
That's right.
And so a lot of it comes down to, I think for me, is like, one, yes, how are you telling the story? And I think going through the customer avatar exercises and, you know, what are their motivations? What are their questions? Like, absolutely. But I think one is, what are you doing in terms of, and what can you do in terms of literally just taking your phone and taking video and photo, like, of the product, and just giving it a shot to make it look more real, right? And the creative that I talked about, that was the one that beat it out for this example, they literally just took a shot from a different angle outside of this bracelet set. It's in a gift box and it had flowers behind it. And that's all that we did. And, you know, and so it wasn't like it was a big difference, and that was huge. And then we integrated in the lower part of the funnel, user-generated content. So we just integrated reviews, and we integrated people wearing the product, and that changed the game for us too. So the question I always ask is, like, one, you know, what do you have that's not something that's on a white background, like, of the product?
So true.
And two, what are you doing in terms of user-generated content? How are you integrating that? Because really, what it comes down to, we just recorded a podcast that's going to come out on this soon about kind of the creative process, but a lot of it is trying to get across, you know, why are people going to trust you? They don't know you from anybody. So how are you kind of putting through the imagery and through the copy trust and the ability for people to know that they have an out, that you're not going to just take their money and they'll never see a product, so that's why reviews are so important, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that's the type of stuff that I think about that. But in terms of the creative, I think it's interesting. It's always good to see big brands and what they're doing too. We worked with Kind snack bars for a couple of years, and with Hilton for a couple of years. And those examples were fascinating because they had the issue. They had the opposite issue. The thing was like, we can do whatever we want. What do you want to do? Right. And for me, it was always coming down to the realness. It was always coming down to, what can we show them that looks like something that's going to be in their feed, that's not going to be different, that's going to talk about brand value proposition and going to give them a reason of why we're better than somebody else. Right. And instead of making some fancy, funny, over the top video, it's going to cost them $30,000. So
which they end up doing and then realizing they don't need to, right?
Yeah, right. I think that that's true. And I think that a lot of people should know that you don't have to have that. You can get creative and you can get scrappy. And many times that's going to perform better than what you spent a whole bunch of money to create.
So when it comes to creative, how do you help clients understand what you actually need for Facebook? Do you come with templates, swipe files, etc., or do you kind of start from scratch and build it up with the clients?
It depends on the client. I mean, definitely we have examples of things that we'll share. Hey, these are things that we really like. This is the type of thing that we're looking for. If they're in a similar vertical, there are certain clients that we have share agreements with, that like we can show them the creative from that client and we can say, this is what this looks like to a potential client or to somebody we're coaching or working with. And so making sure that they're cool with it and then saying, hey, this is working for this brand right now. Right. And I think it's very powerful when we do coaching calls, which we do a lot of. I did 200 audits last year, and a lot of them, and then they end in like a coaching call type of thing. And a lot of them, it's much more powerful if I'm able to go into an account and be like, this is what this looks like. Right. So that's kind of how we start to go through it. And sometimes people don't know. And obviously they need to just go from total scratch. So then I'm going to say like, all right, look, let's set up a Slack channel together, and I'm just going to, if I see something I like and my wife sees something, my wife/business partner sees something she likes, we're going to upload it into the Slack channel. Stuff that we're seeing right now that we think is inspiring and kind of the way that we want to go. I think that a lot of times, when I was at my previous employer, the big agency, what we did was we had, a massive deck of ideas, and ultimately it was the paradox of choice for too many people. I mean, there's just way too many things. So I'm very much now in the things that we do, think about the, MVP model of minimum viable product, just like give me 5 things that we can test, right? Like, give me 5 things. This is generally what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, the product to be more than 50% of the image. I'm looking for it to have a pop of color. I'm looking for it to have some sort of realness to it. So it's not staged in a white background. It's not just sitting alone. I'm looking, if we can, to also try to integrate movement. So if we can have some sort of boomerang feature, if we can have something of the box opening and closing, if we can have something of the product being held up of what it looks like, if we can have you pulling the product to show the quality, that's the type of thing that we're looking for. And so many times that's really what we're going through. And I wish I could say that I have some sort of like dialed in method on it, but I think that a lot of the value proposition of what we do is that it is personalized. I personally don't have stuff like that. And we've made suggestions in the courses with Jon, like around these types of things that I just talked about, but, and it's good guidance, but I don't think it's a be all and end all. I mean, the biggest thing that you can do for your creative is you can create something that is so good that people are going to talk about it. So they're going to comment, like, and share on it, and then you have social proof, and then you're on the road to win. I mean, I know that you like to start stuff in PPE, at page post engagement, and kind of get it going there. And we've been doing less of that. Conversion seems to be working a little bit better for us now in terms of social proofing, but that's a huge one. If you have something that's so compelling that people are tagging each other, then and usually, depending on how much you're spending, you'll know that within a day. If people are tagging or there's a couple comments, you're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. This is something people care about. And that's a very, very helpful thing, obviously, for helping lowering costs, et cetera.
Absolutely. So I think the social proofing thing, I think sometimes people don't understand. It's not just about getting more likes and comments. There's science and logic behind posts that have a lot of likes and shares. Because like if you see the first ad that lands and it's got 1 like, you're less likely to interact with it, because it's that whole it's a psychological thing that we have about herding. So, for example, if you go to a coffee shop and you see a lot of people in there, you're just going to assume the coffee's good, right? If you go to a coffee shop, it's completely empty, restaurant, whatever it is, your first instinct is, why is it empty? It's like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Why is this lunch place empty? Same thing happens with Facebook ads. And that's why powering up through broad targeted audience, PPE, for your best ads does play a big part in helping conversion. I just read I don't know if you know Kat Howell, but someone in her team did a little study on the impact of the social interactions, and also Tim Bird has done some kind of work on the scale of the different number of interactions, so 1,000, 10,000, 100K into the millions, and the kind of the impact it can have on scaling up as well. It does make a huge difference. So that's something which I know Facebook have started to recognize a bit more. They know that people share post IDs and stuff like that. And one of the recent updates was allowing you to continue the social proof in the new ads you create as well. So Facebook know this, whether they kind of promote it or would ever tell people to use it, I doubt, but it works. And this is a big part of hacking Facebook to make it work for you. There's so many ways to use the platform. Some of the hacks are ethical, some of them are maybe not so ethical, but the platform is there to be taken advantage of. And I'd argue even the Facebook product managers, the engineers, the reps, they don't really know the full extent of how to use the platform. It's people like us and the listeners right now who are in the weeds, who find new and novel ways of doing stuff, and then you test it and you just see what works.
Yeah, I mean, so I totally agree. I mean, I think, let me comment on the rep thing briefly. I think that the challenge that you have with a Facebook rep, and I think social proofing is a great example, is that majority of the people that are Facebook reps, I mean, as you spend more, the quality goes up of the people that you're talking to, but the majority of them are not practitioners. That's the issue. They haven't done what we have done, and they do not do what we do on a regular basis. And so you have that as an issue. And then you compound that with the fact that there are certain things that they need to introduce. There's adoptions that they want you to adopt products. They want you to adopt account simplification. They want you to adopt the marketplace placement. I mean, et cetera, as examples, right? And so they're balancing, how do I bring this up to somebody to say, hey, this is great, and you should try it. And then somebody tries it and it sucks. Like, how do you balance that? And that's really a challenge. And that's something that, unfortunately, we as Facebook advertisers have had to wade through. And that is the reason. One of the things that I've done recently with my colleague David Herman is we have started a group that's just called the Facebook and Instagram Pro Ad Buyers Group. It's not that fancy, but basically, this group we created to bring all of us together globally so we can have a better collective voice to go to Facebook and say, hey, this is sort of an issue for us. And one of the things that we're talking about is things like this, which is, if you're going to have things that you're trying to introduce, let us know what those are. When are they coming out? Let us know real results with them, et cetera. Because otherwise, we don't know and we're flying blind. And many of us don't have the budgets to just shift over to test something that hasn't been proven. Some do, and that's great if you do, and thank you for leading the way and blazing the trail. But a lot of us do not, and so that's a big part of that that we're working.
Yeah. So I mean, one thing that Facebook do, which I don't think they kind of advertise well enough or kind of let people know of, is they alpha test some products with some advertisers, and they get super early access. Sometimes they get ad credits as well to test these things out.
Yeah.
However, the gap is that those results are never shared. So CBO, for example, was launched sometime in 2018, and it was just landed on us. Like, here's campaign budget optimization, a few notes in the help section of like what it is, and that was it. There's no case studies, no kind of best practice. We've tested it. These are our findings and stuff like that. And we had to find it out ourselves. It took me a good 3 to 4 months of testing, of failure, to figure out how to make CBO work. I would have loved to have had that from Facebook straight up. And actually, the turning point for me was seeing one of their success stories. So they publish case studies every week of people who have had success with different products. And I read up this particular one on CBO, and the one switch that they made was going from 7-day click optimization at the ad set level to 1 day. And the rationale behind that was because it was a higher ticket item. They, as they were pushing more spend into their CBO, the 1 day optimization made sure that the ad sets for that given day that were getting good results got the best budget. And that opened my mind up to looking at it differently. And since that point, I've made CBO work profitably and consistently just by that one switch. Now, if Facebook had tested that and showed that, like, for example, lower AOV products, do it like this, higher AOV like this, these are some of our findings, that would be awesome. Like, just have a great, almost like a media buying team within Facebook to launch new products, prove they work, show they work, and then share them to the rest of the world. That, I think, would be amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be an incredible idea. It's interesting about CBO. I've had a very similar experience. I mean, I think that when CBO came out, many of us were like, oh yeah, we should test this. We should try it. And then you tried it and then you were like, I don't know, it didn't work. And same thing. I think it took everybody a little bit to figure it out. And most people, the thing I'm dealing with now is that most people tried it when it came out and then it didn't work. And now they're very skeptical.
That's right.
And so that's a challenge. The biggest thing for me with CBO is actually not around the bid window, although that's interesting. With a higher AOV, it's not something I would have thought of, but a 1 day click optimization, I guess for that makes sense. You're wanting them to pull the trigger. What we've found is just making sure that you're not putting different size audiences in the CBO. So, because obviously one's going to steal most of the spend. So that's a big one that's very, very helpful. And then just budgetary. I mean, I think your rule is 3 times the CPA per ad set.
Yeah,
roughly. Yeah. And so it's like with us, I've had to convince people like, hey, if we're going to test this, then we need to spend more. Otherwise we're going to choke ourselves. You can't have a $75 a day budget with a $30 AOV and 5 ad sets under the CBO. You're just going to totally screw yourself. So a lot of it comes down to that. So I don't know. It's interesting, and it does appear that they are more efficient initially. I haven't seen CBOs necessarily, I would say at this point, deliver the consistency unless there's a creative in there that we know is like social proof that's really, really, really good. So if you don't have the creative dialed in yet, that the CBO and really blowing it up might be a risk initially. I think you really have to figure out, kind of pre-test those audiences and then obviously graduate them into that CBO.
Absolutely. And I think that was the other thing that I was trying to use CBO to bypass testing and do faster testing. But actually, it doesn't work because it's optimizing so frequently across ad sets, across ads. And that's exactly as you've said. We test the audiences first, test the creatives first, find the pairs that are working, then move those into CBO. As you touched on, it's minimum 3 times the CPA per ad set. So, if your CPA is $30, you've got one ad set that's $90 minimum per ad set, times the number of ad sets. So you've got 5 ad sets, that's $450 now you're running on the CBO, plus running rules and automation. Like, that's the other thing which has made the biggest difference is CBO, I think the logic isn't quite there yet. So there's some machine learning I think Facebook still needs to apply. And therefore, I put rules in place to cut bad performers at the ad level early on, and then let the spend reorganize itself. And the great thing about that is when you're doing that, there's less impact on that, like the learning phase and the optimization and things like that. And if you see a good day, you can scale it up a lot more successfully than you can in a single ad set as well.
Yeah, I mean, the scaling side of CBOs is crazy. I mean, that's what the example I shared earlier of going from like 1,500 to, just ridiculous amounts of spend within a couple weeks. I think we were spending like $30,000 last Friday. Anyway, that particular example, CBOs are what helped us do that, and they hold a lot more. They just take budget better versus I think many times they didn't. Just an ad set didn't before. It's interesting. You, along with many other colleagues, are big proponents of automated rules, and I know a lot of people that use them successfully. And it's not something that I utilize. It's not something that I'm as big on. I think it's because I have a control problem. So I'm like not ready to give it up yet, but I do know a lot of people that use them really successfully. So that's interesting and a good reminder for people listening.
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things that have worked for us with rules, and we use a tool called RevealBot, is not just on running the rules, but we push it into our workflow. So the cool thing about RevealBot is it puts alerts into Slack. So for every client, we have a number of different channels. So we can have an alert for an optimization, an alert for any budget changes. We've got alert for our testing as well. So we've semi-automated our testing process using rules, using alerts. And also one of the cool features is if the rules have pulled out all the ads in an ad set, we also get an alert to say there's no ads running. Like they're all things that you'd otherwise be manually monitoring. And when you're running multiple accounts, it makes a huge difference on time saving. And, they're all things that, my view is I love technology as long as it can enable me to do more growth stuff. So all the kind of laborious stuff, if I can push it to the machines, the rules and optimizations, that's great. And then I can get my media buyers working on stuff that's actually going to shift the needle. So creative and audience and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's where Facebook opening that up and the API has made a huge difference for me in particular. And I would encourage you and anyone listening to give rules a go. You don't have to get a tool. You can use Facebook initially to do a lot of the rules. The only challenge with Facebook rules is they apply every 30 minutes, whereas with tools like RevealBot and I think maybe a few others, they apply every 15 minutes. And certainly when you're at scale, those 15 minutes can make a big difference as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mentioned RevealBot in my course because that seemed to be the about scaling last year with Jon Loomer, because that seemed to be the one that people were utilizing quite a bit. So yeah, anyway, it's interesting to chat about and hear your opinion.
Absolutely. So we've got about 13 minutes to go. So I'm going to open it up for questions for anyone that's listening. This is your opportunity to ask Andrew questions on Facebook ads strategy, tactics, e-com, his agency, the work he's doing. And of course myself as well, but this is Andrew's time. So if you have questions, it would be great if you can fire those out into the comments. I'll come through and pick out the questions. Just going through the comments right now. So someone said, is it Jon Loomer? It is Jon Loomer. It's actually spelt Jon Loomer. So go and check that out if you want. Uzera says, thanks for having this live. Thanks for joining us on the live. I enjoy speaking to people like Andrew, and it's great for you guys to learn and kind of listen in as well. Evan says, brand new and performance marketing. God bless you, sir. Thank you very much. That's just something which I want people to kind of take away and focus on a lot more. Rick says, avid listener of the e-commerce influence podcast. You guys need to check that out. So that's Andrew's podcast that he runs, I think, with your partner as well. There's so much gold in there as well. So that's super awesome. Rick, yes, I was at the Creative Hackathon. I didn't know you were there. A bit of a shame. We're probably sitting right next to each other and we didn't even know. Ryan said, paradox of choice is so real for creative. It absolutely is. And I think this is where a good testing program can make a big difference to kind of overcome some of that as well. Chantel says, show us the ad ID inside the interface, please. I completely agree, because I don't know if, Andrew, you've got a better way of doing it, but at the moment, if you want to share post IDs, it's convoluted, honestly.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It's not easy. And actually, I am proud to say that I believe nobody has given me a confident vote, but I have been basically, along with a couple of other agency partners, pushing for the ad ID duplication thing that we now have for like 2 years. So we now have it, and I can recall specifically like at least 4 meetings I had with Facebook corporate to get that. So I'm pushing now strongly to have it in the interface to make it a lot easier. I agree, because it's like, this is nuts. I mean, you can duplicate it, but also like make it easier for us to find.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So one hack I will share is when I set up my ad account, I have like a holding folder for my original ads.
Sure.
And what I do is when I create the ad and once it gets approved, I take the post ID and I save it in the ad name itself. So that whenever I make duplicates, I just copy and paste, and I can make a duplicate of that same ad, grab the post ID, and then just enter ID and just paste it in. So still a bit convoluted, but it's a quicker way of doing it as well.
We do the same thing in actually Depesh. The course one of the courses we taught last year in December was optimization and organization. And one of the tenets of that course was keeping track of your creative testing. And one thing that I have, which is like not even that complicated, but blows people's minds sometimes, is a creative testing log, where like, what did you test? What did it do? How did it go? Type of thing, with the post IDs copied in there as well. And so that's a very helpful one for me. A thing that I like to do too is have like basically like kind of like a stable of creative that I'm always testing. That's like once a creative starts to die or isn't doing as well, if it's has social proof on it and I'm scaling and like I can tell that the funnel is like needing more, I can pull from those and bring them into this to kind of freshen it up. So that's a tactic that I really, really like, because then you're not worried like, what if this one dies, or you know what I mean, and you're not overly dependent upon one thing.
Absolutely. Where do you record your creatives? Is it a document, or do you have that?
Yeah, it's just a Google Doc. I just keep it track of by client on a creative testing log. So it has set up. It just says like the date it was launched, what it is, basically a general description, what the performance has been in the first month, and then what the performance has been since then. So like, did it do well in the first 30 days? Because many times if something does well initially, then obviously you can do that and you can restart it a lot of times.
Absolutely.
And at a lower budget, and it'll keep going. So that's one that I really, really like. I do the same thing for audiences as well. So I have an audience testing log where we go through, because a lot of times, you can just lose track of all of the different options you can have. And I had gone back yesterday. I was thinking about where I could scale another account, and I was looking at value based off of a value source, looking at off the pixel. And I had done it only for purchases in this one particular account. I had never done it off of an actual add to cart or another event for this one account. I'd done it in others, but not this one. And so that testing log, the audience testing log, I was like, oh God, I haven't done that yet. And so I created a 5% lookalike of an add to cart optimization, and that's at a 4x today. So it's like, that is the type of stuff that, if you're a very organized person and you have a team, maybe you could do this and that's good. But as a person like me, I'm doing it on my own in a lot of cases, or with my colleague who I work with. And so keeping track of that's good, because otherwise you have to look through the ad account, and I can look through see kind of what did well.
Absolutely. Question from Josh. You guys mentioned PPE first. Can I use an ad as PPE first, then use it as a lead form? So one thing I would say is, 12 months ago, I used to do probably 90% of my testing in PPE first. But over the last 6 months, PPE has become trash. Like the amount of bot traffic, spam traffic. One of the metrics I use, I don't know if you look at this as well, Andrew, is I look at the ratio of outbound clicks and landing page views. And I'm looking at how many of those clicks from my ad converted into a landing page view. And what I noticed over time was that PPE was just dropping dramatically. Like 50, 40, 30% of my clicks would actually turn into landing page views. That is bot traffic. That is spam traffic. That is fake accounts that are trying to engage in posts and are therefore identified by Facebook as engagers, but it's just all fake traffic. It's really, really poor quality. So great for social proofing sometimes, but when it comes to testing, just as Andrew said, I start off with website conversion first. And I actually test different pixels out to find the one that's going to give me the best CPM and good performance. But my view, especially in the US, there are still some European markets where PPE testing works, and it works well. But in the US, I would encourage you not to use PPE for testing.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. It's not something that we've been using less of it. I still, in a lot of cases, will have, an email list, PPE running with different creatives of new products sometimes, also, and running it parallel in a conversion campaign, or like with a previous purchaser. And sometimes you can, if you have enough data, you can do those in windows, obviously. So you're showing, you're treating the customers that came over from a long time ago differently, et cetera, and customer segmenting on previous purchasers, which I know you do a lot of, and something I'm huge on. I don't think you can win in Facebook now without doing that. But PPE is still helpful in that regard. But I've seen, 45 days, 60 days, really a shift in those last days of conversion being a better vehicle, or lead gen, or just the objective being a better vehicle for running it instead of PPE. So I look at the exact same ratio of link clicks to landing page views, actually. So that's very helpful to tell you if what you're seeing is actually real.
Absolutely. Shashia says, in a CBO campaign, is it better to have a broad audience by age group, even if you already know which age group works best, so that the CBO has a bigger audience to work with?
Yeah, I mean, for me, if you know that if you know and you know your core demographic, then layering in the core demographic is like the better thing to do because you'll refine the spend from the outset. If you don't know and you are still testing and it's a new product or something like that, then I would just make it wide and it'll just spend where it finds the most efficiency. Um, I I I mean, I just saw basically like if you go through and look at different accounts, you can see those age ranges that it's always doing well in. And so I sometimes like to limit that just because there are, especially if you have a product that let's say is for people that are like 40 and older or something, or 45 and older, because especially in the US, what will happen is the number of daily active users on IGS or on newsfeed are so high, on the Instagram newsfeed are so high that they're going to steal a lot of the spend and it may not be the most efficient.
That's right.
So I would say, you know, if you know that for a fact and you've done testing and you've like spent a decent amount of money to know, you know, these are my people, then layer that in and you're going to save a lot of money. But if you haven't and you're curious, then open it up wide. I mean, see what happens. You know, you never know, and it can sometimes surprise you.
Absolutely. Chantel says, what do you look for? So this is your example when scaling a CBO campaign, 1,500 to 30K ad spend.
Yeah, I mean, so what I was looking for essentially in this is I go by really the mentality of the horizontal scaling methodology, right? Of thinking about, and I really learned this from Molly Pittman a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. She talked about it on Perpetual Traffic podcast, and it was the first time I'd heard it talked about that. I'd used it, but I hadn't really known that's what I was doing. And so essentially, what that comes down to, and for me, and I'm not saying this works for everybody, but it was, what creatives and audiences can I introduce to this as I'm scaling every day that are going to bring in different types of people? So what different hooks and pitches and creative can I put out there that's going to bring in a different type of a person? And if I have a creative that's winning, if I have one or two creatives that's doing really well, then it becomes a question of what audiences are out there for me to create that are different. So an example is, instead of thinking about, okay, I'm going to launch this to my previous purchaser 1% audience, and I'm going to launch it to my add to cart 1% last 30 days or something. Think about it in segments. Think about things like high and low value interests, or lookalikes, and then different size segments of those. So an example would be high value would be add to cart, purchase, initiate checkout. Those are high value, right? Those people you know are converting. And then you could think about things as like low value. Now, low value can be relative, but low value would be page view. Maybe they're on your email list. And so separating it by that and having those be two different CBOs. And then you can do it by size. So maybe the lower one of low value, maybe you have a 2% groupings that you're running, and then you have a 10% or an 8% grouping of the same thing. And then you do the same thing with interests. So then you're separating out by interest, looking at not just lumping them together as we would have previously done to try to get ourselves through the learning phase, but trying to take competitors and doing a CBO with 4 different competitor interests and running it that way. And so then you have a diversified set of audiences that are out there that you're trying to make, to put your ad in front of. And then it's the same thing in the mid to lower part of the funnel. So what are you doing with engagers? What are you doing with your percentage-based custom audiences versus those that aren't? What are you doing with your time windows? And are you remarketing 30 days all at one lump? I mean, that's a big one that for that was the old model, right? You'd be like, yeah, just go to 30 day. Well, if I went 30 days ago to your website, like I'm probably not, it's not top of mind, right? So like thinking about separating the windows. And so it's separating time windows that way, just like you are in the prospecting side, and utilizing different creatives throughout so that something that might identify to this lookalike group is going to be different to this interest group and trying to speak to them differently. So that's really what I'm doing and what I'm looking for as I try to scale that way.
Awesome advice. Question from Manny. So when CBO becomes the main way to run multiple ad sets, September 2019, how can you test after September multiple assets under the same campaign? So what's your, I guess, how are you kind of seeing that happening from September onwards? I
mean, I think I'm just going to use one audience per campaign initially, I would think, and then I'll just, do that. I mean, I think if I'm going to test, it depends on what the goal is. I mean, if the goal is to test multiple assets and get an idea of what people are like, what they're interested in, then I guess I would just run it to my like 180 page view, and I would run it to a lookalike of that, like a bigger lookalike of that, and see if there's any sort of commonalities between them. And then I can build out the structure that I kind of just talked about from there. So I don't know. What do you think? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to change it a ton for me, to be honest.
yeah. I think it depends on kind of how you're doing it right now. So I use a method called graduation testing where I do bite-sized testing. I find my winning ad set and audience pairs, and then I graduate them to my scaling campaigns, which are either CBO or non-CBO. So that does impact me because I don't test on spend. I test on number of impressions that the ad has got. Because the problem testing on spend is, if someone says spend $50 a day, $50 and then make a decision, if you have a $50 CPM, that's $50 for 1,000 impressions, is lower relevance for a result than if you've got £10 CPM, that $50 is going to give you 5,000 impressions. So that imbalances it. So I look at impressions-based testing. But what we're actually doing right now is a few things. So CBO, looking at min and max budgets. That's something you can do at the ad set level. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is exploring more around dynamic content optimization. So you just create one ad, you throw all your assets in, and Facebook split tests all the variants within that. And so prior, where we'd split all our ads out and test one by one, we'll do it in the split test tool as well. So there are just a few things we're playing around with and seeing how we can create the best recipe to work with CBO. We still have a good four to 5 months to figure this out, but they're the kind of things that we're playing with right now.
Yeah, I think two things to say. One is DCO is really interesting. If you have assets, if your goal is creative testing, which I think it's important to understand, like you do want to do both. You want to do creative testing and still have an eye on brand or on performance. But I think that many times people will say, well, I want to launch ads and I want them to make money, but I also want to test. And it's a very hard thing to do because with smaller budgets, you have to sort of decide what's important to you right now, like initially. And I think DCO does a very good job of that, especially in a shorter time window. And so that's really, really helpful. The other thing I heard the other day directly from Facebook is that the September timeframe is not going to be a hard date for everyone.
That's right.
So although we should be ready for it by then, it's not going to roll out to everyone.
Let me tell you how I've interpreted that. That is, we're going to roll it out in September, but on Black Friday is when everyone's going to get it. And it's just
right. And then it's going to screw up everything. Yeah, definitely.
But that's Facebook for you. Like I think every year I've advertised on Facebook, give or take around Black Friday, there's been some kind of problem. Last year was unbelievable, but like that was fascinating last year, definitely. And it was a huge challenge for so many people. That's such an interesting time because there's so much volume, and in order to play that game well, you have to basically kind of do what you're doing, but also do a whole bunch of stuff you never do the rest of the year. Absolutely. We started it with our clients in October, pre-seeding audiences into engagement audiences and in video view audiences so that we were able to remarket those custom audiences through Q4 so that we didn't have to pay for conversion campaigns as much as everyone else. And that was huge, but like I would never do that really normally. Absolutely.
So, there's a lot of stuff that happens in that time frame that you're just I've seen so many screenshots and done coaching calls with people and they're like, Black Friday, I did this awesome thing. And I'm like, that is insane. That would never work any other time. Like $50 CPC bids and stuff like that.
Insane. We're over the time. We've got a few questions still. How are you looking for time right now?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Let's keep it rocking.
Cool. So Ivan says, awesome content. At what frequency for a cold audience does a creative tend to go bad for you?
For me, it's not necessarily around frequency, although frequency is certainly a signal for it. For me, really what I'm looking at is the first time impression ratio as it relates to top funnel. So if you've never done this, you can roll over your ad sets that have gone through, completed most of the learning phase. And there's, you can roll over the little green button that says it's active in your ad set level and it says see delivery insights. And you can go and look at that. And the first time impression ratio is basically gives you an idea of when the ad set was started, the percentage of the audience that saw it for the first time, and then you can see it declining over time. And so I've had people say, hey, I had something that was rocking on a 1% lookalike, and then it just died. And inevitably, you'll always go and look at that, and their first-time impression ratio is like 20%. And so that's really where that's what I'm looking at. And a lot of times the frequency will be something like a 2 or a 3 in that case too. But so frequency, I would say if you're showing a frequency, even on remarketing of like a 3 over a 7-day period, like that's a lot and you're hitting the same people. And it goes in phases too, right? Like it's going to find the most qualified people, and then it's going to find less qualified people, et cetera, et cetera. And so a frequency of 3 is one that I kind of look at over like a 7-day period as a guide mark, but also I'm looking at that first time impression ratio.
Absolutely. And what I would add is focus on your end metrics, ROAS and CPA, CPL, whatever it is, and only react to frequency when you feel like the performance is dropping, or just ahead of that. Because if you focus too much on frequency and relevance score, which I see a lot of people focus on, and your results are good, you're going to end up screwing up your ad account when you didn't actually need to make a change. Because sometimes Facebook also adapts based on your targeting, the frequency, and things like that. So you have to sometimes give it a bit of time as well. Roger says, what's the advantage of CBO versus multiple interests in one ad set? So I think the question is separate interests in separate ad sets for a CBO versus combining them into one ad set.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so it's basically horizontal scaling methodology, right? It's the idea of we used to lump everything together and like sort of like the bigger the better, right? And if you could condense like audiences together, you would graduate the learning phase faster. Yep. Where we stand now with CBO is CBO, although Facebook hasn't really admitted this yet, has less of an overlap problem. And so you are able to take audiences that are very similar to one another that you would have normally not put in competition with one another, and put them in the same CBO. And so this is the exact same thing with interests, which is, we have a client that has they're very NBA focused. And so they're doing different NBA players, 4 different NBA players in their CBO lined up against each other, and they're all about the same size. And that is basically giving us, more scale. It's giving us more people to show it to that aren't lumped, and it's not giving Facebook the choice like, oh, okay, we're going to only show these to the fans of this particular player, right? So it allows you to kind of separate things out, and it allows you to say, oh, okay, you know what? Like, these 3 are doing really well. One's bad, so you can turn the one off, and you can take the other 3. And if you want additional scale, you can put it through the CBO. And if it's not working as well, and you feel like it's kind of not setting it properly, you can put them each in their own CBO, technically, to continue to scale further to penetrate that audience a little bit farther. So that's what I like about it. And it just offers, it just offers you kind of more instead of trying to lump it and giving that one ad set like $2,000 a day budget or whatever.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take one more question. There's still lots of questions piling in. What I would say is at the end, Andrew will share how to follow him and how to kind of follow up on questions, I'm sure. Yeah. Also, you can join my group. I think Andrew's in my group as well.
Yeah.
We'll try to answer questions there, but we'll also try and come back to the questions on the live as well. Interesting question on pausing ad sets at night and restarting them at a profitable hour. So Alex says, I heard small pauses don't affect campaign optimization. What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, this is interesting. Somebody actually talked to me too about pausing things and starting ad sets at 3 a.m. or something like that. Here's the thing. If you think that if you've seen and you've tested that pausing it out at a certain hour and restarting it at another hour is helpful, then great. Like, does a pause of a certain amount of time or a finite amount of time affect optimization? Yeah, I mean, technically, yes, it does. It does. I don't live in a world where that's true. I mean, true. Like, it will affect your optimization, but ad accounts can do weird stuff, like pausing it out and maybe it works. I've never done that. That's not something that I'm big on, and I like to let Facebook do its job. I think that there can be success that people see by doing things, like that are more tactical, that you're in the weeds and you're having to turn things up and down and you're doubling and tripling and doing bid overrides and things like that. Like I know, and I've seen those accounts work. So if that works for you, then great, keep it up. Right. So, but there's no real data that pausing it from a small standpoint or like for only an hour is going to affect that. What does work, if you're thinking about, if you've seen something decline over time or a certain audience declining over time, you can always pause it, duplicate it, and start it at a lower budget, and you can make audiences live for like 3 or 4 lives. I mean, that's really a great tactic if you're looking to optimize that way.
Absolutely, and the key point there is test. So if I tell you anything that works for me, Andrew tells you stuff that's worked for him. There's no guarantee it's going to work for your account because there's so many variables variables to play with as well. So absolutely test it. If you found that pausing it and restarting it works, great. If you've heard it works, then test it and see if it works for you. Some ad accounts I do pause at midnight and restart later on. Some of them I don't. Others I will pause during the day, but then I won't restart the following day until like 6 o'clock in the morning. But I test on all these different accounts. And when people say, what are the rules that you apply? What are the different things you apply? It's really hard because no one set rule works for every single account in most cases. So absolutely, the kind of parting thought would be to test everything. So I think that's a good point to end on. Andrew, it's been amazing. We could have gone on for many more hours, I'm sure. And I'd love to kind of jam with you again some point in the future, whether in person or online. How do people follow you that want to kind of hear more about your stuff and ask you more questions or get in touch?
Definitely. A couple options. You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Foxwell. I actually on Facebook do a lot with, like I said, the Facebook and Instagram pro ad buyers group. I can link that. I'll put all this in a comment on this thread. And then you can listen to the e-commerce influence podcast as well. And I think that's probably the best ways to follow along on what we're doing. The podcast is definitely a really good resource for a lot of people listening to this. So hopefully you get value out of that, and you can shoot me a DM on Twitter, and we can take it from there as well. And you can also shoot me a DM, of course, on Facebook. But I really much appreciate your time, taking time at 9 at night, your time, man, to like hang out at 9 and 10 o'clock at night with me. And so
once the
it's
kids
really, really good.
So yeah, it's free time.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Cool. It's been a pleasure. Guys, thanks for joining us on the Facebook Ads Power Hour. Slightly longer than an hour, so really appreciate Andrew for taking the additional questions. We'll be live again in a few weeks' time with another expert, and you can follow me in the group for the alerts or join my email list on depeshmandalia.com to hear about the next lives that are coming up. So thanks, Andrew. Hope you have an awesome day, and thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We'll speak to you again soon.